Tasmanian Community Fund presents the Breaking Barriers, Building Futures podcast, hosted by Chairperson Sally Darke, in conversation with Board Director Alex McKenzie.
Welcome, Alex, to our podcast, Breaking Barriers, Building Futures. We're today at Deloraine House in the Meander Valley Municipality, and a really good opportunity for us as we come to the end of our period of time with the TCF to reflect on our period and talk a little bit about the future. Just before we get underway, Alex, I would like to do an acknowledgement of country, and so the Tasmanian Community Fund acknowledges the ancient history and the culture of the Palawa people, their deep and ongoing connection to the land, to the seas, to the waterways and skies of Lutruwita, Tasmania. We pay our respects to elders past and present and acknowledge and pay respect to all Tasmanian people. Alex, you and I had an opportunity to talk a couple of years ago on video, and we talked very operationally about the Tasmanian Community Fund, a little bit about how to put an application in, some of the barriers, etc., and some of the things to think about. So thought today we might look a little bit more strategically and have a think about the last period of time for you. 6 years on the board of the Tasmanian Community Fund, for me 9 years, 8 years as chair, and just a little bit of what we've seen and then also what we think moving forward. So maybe, Alex, we might start with the sector. Tell me a little bit about what you've learnt about the not-for-profit sector and the community sector over the period of time that you've been on the board.
I think probably broadly, Sally, the thing that I have learnt that will stay with me is just how much people are willing to do. The culture around Tasmania of various people with various interests coming together to really try and achieve solutions, local solutions to what are broadly understood to be really significant wicked policy problems is just extraordinary. And you and I have spoken at length about it. It's probably the key privilege of being on the board is to see that effort, to get up close to it, to meet those people in their spaces and to really see them driving towards a Tasmania where everybody gets an opportunity to live a good life no matter where they are. I joined the board of the TCF when I was already a board member of TASCOS, the Tasmanian Council of Social Services, and then obviously went on to have a period as chair of TASCOS. So that, in my time, very much had a policy focus and an industry focus. There are individual members of TASCOS, but inevitably it's the peak body for the industry. The lens that you get with the TCF is something altogether different. As I say, you get to travel around with our meetings being held in the different municipalities and to see people where they are, see where they're comfortable and get to see them with their friends and family. And it's been extraordinary. But as I say, the lesson I think is just one of how much people are willing to do.
There's some terrific organisations out there around the state in the not-for-profit sector, and those organisations have terrific board members, management and operational people who are really trying to make a difference to the lives of those, particularly those less fortunate and those who don't necessarily have the access nor the voice. And our opportunity to be able to meet with those people and to try and assist where we can. And, sometimes it's about providing the grants, but sometimes it might be as simple as introducing them to others and what others are doing, etc. It's been one of the privileges that I feel in working within the sector for the last period of time.
I think that's right, Sally. And I think the other thing that I have learnt, even if I tell myself that I may have known it intrinsically, the thing that has really come back to me time and time again is that whilst parochialism can be fun, it actually does us a great disservice. Primarily because I think we miss out on seeing value in the solutions that are elsewhere and we're so hard about how we consider elsewhere to be. I think about my beloved Northwest Coast. It is so rare for us to come together as a region to consider things from a regional solutions perspective, or to acknowledge the solutions that might be in one of the satellite areas that are extraordinary. And I would just love to see more of that around the state, because I think that that's what the TCF tries to do, and I think that will continue to be its legacy in terms of bringing communities together.
And Alex, we've seen that done successfully when we bring people into the room who have been successful with their grant applications, and they come and talk to the board about how their projects are going, but more so they talk to each other. And there's so much learning that occurs on those days that I think we've found that in some ways that's better than necessarily all the written reports, is those verbal reports, that verbal storytelling, that data coming through which they share with each other has been a really valuable part of our processes over the last period of time.
And it's plainly energising for people to realise that they're not in it alone, that their communities, whilst there are things that absolutely make them special, and that's one of the things about travelling to where people are, you need to understand the local context. But there are also lessons to be learnt, and some of those lessons are that you're on the right path and that your effort does matter and that people see it. So, I'd agree with that.
So, Alex, when you look at the not-for-profit sector and, you talk about parochialism being one of the challenges, what are the other challenges you see for the sector as we move forward?
Well, Sally, we know that the national philanthropics are looking to longer-term funding and funding that's attached to outcomes, with an understanding that shifting the dial takes time. So I think that is a key challenge for not-for-profit, that understanding both internally and externally, that some stability in the funding that organisations receive to learn the lessons of their projects so they can achieve. That would be a key focus for me if I were in one of those not-for-profit roles.
That's going to require a different mindset, isn't it? Because for many of those organisations, they've been used to very short-term funding. They've been used to funding around election cycles. And, I know over our period of time on the TCF, we've now started to encourage people to actually, I've got examples where an organisation came looking for $50,000 and we sent them away and said, top concept, top idea, but you need to think longer term. You need to think larger amount of funding. And I think as a result of the work they did with the staff of the TCF, as a board, I think we approved something like $500,000 to that organisation. So that's a really good example, isn't it, of the fact that organisations needing to think longer term, if they're going to have impact, being able to invest in order to be able to do that.
Yeah, and given it is our the twilight of our time on the board, very much the twilight, I would say that that is absolutely one of the moments where the TCF board, through its capacity to see the breadth of what's happening in Tasmania, brings then value to those organisations. I remember those conversations where you say, I love your idea, but you are not going to be able to achieve what you think you're able to do with that amount of money and that amount of time. I want to see you shift that dial, but it's not happening in a year. That'll take 5 years and about 3 times as much as what you're asking, because that's what that effort looks like.
What's the mindset change that's needed for organisations around that, Alex?
Oh, look, I think it's really challenging because so much of it is about what resources do they have internally, both from a financial resource, but then also to talk about one of the themes of our strategic plan, what's the capacity of that organisation for its people internally? Have they had access to the right type of training? Have they had access to conversations with people that have done a lot of that type of work and might be able to sort of speed up that learning process for them? So that's going to be the other key challenge. I think about those communities of focus for us, whether it be Circular Head, the West Coast, northern suburbs, or the Derwent or Huon Valley. we want to make sure that the organisations in those areas have the capacity internally to drive solutions themselves. We know that success doesn't often happen if it's being imposed upon you. Those local champions are really important, I think.
And so when you talk about that capacity building and capability building for some of those areas, for me, one of the really important challenges and risks is about strategic thinking. I think, from coming from outside the sector in, is we do have some really strong operational people, and they have been promoted into senior roles. But to have those people around board tables and around the executive who can think strategically, can think long term, can think big picture, is something that I think the sector, like every sector, needs to keep working on, because it is going to be that long term thinking that's going to be where we get those solutions from. Those wicked problems are not solved quickly.
No, they're not. And I think in terms of where the TCF sits as a funder, it does its best, most impactful work when it's proving new ideas for then other limbs of the funding apparatus or the funding system, whether that be local, state, federal governments or other philanthropy, then step in to fund. The TCF is at its best when it's proving those fresh concepts.
Agree 100%. If I look back over my period of time, the projects that have been the most successful are the ones where we have seed funded, and then as a result of that seed funding, others have picked it up and run with, and I think that is the sweet spot for the TCF now, and I think it will be over the next period of time.
In that, to ask you a question, what does social impact mean to you?
I think over the period it's changed a little. I remember when I first came on as chair, a person who had a lot of time for Dan Norton said to me, Sally, the TCF gets $6.5 million a year. How do you measure the success? How do you measure whether you're getting good value out of that 6.5 million? And, I started off with a good KPMG hat on and thought about economic return, and we did some work in the economic return area. We've also done evaluation work at the other extreme in the social area, etc. I think for me, social impact is the thing we do need to be measuring, and that is, for me, very much going back to the purpose of the organisation and actually measuring to what degree it's actually meeting the purpose, and then with not just activities, and I think this is a thing I've really noticed over the period, we're not after activities, we're after outcomes, and we need to be really clear on measuring those outcomes. When I first started, I think it was very hard for us to measure exactly what we were getting for that 6.5 million because we had so many projects. I think, probably 300 active projects.
Absolutely.
Now as we sit today, with 100 active projects and probably heading more as we move forward to less than that, I think we're in a much better position to work with those that we are funding to be really clear what is the impact that we're getting. And for me, that social impact is absolutely what it's about. It's about achieving against those outcomes.
I'd probably add one further thing to that, and that would be that idea of systems change, particularly from the perspective of seeing the TCF as a prover of concepts, and also that it's agile enough to bring people and organisations together in a genuinely collaborative effort to see that outcome that you're talking about. I think about, and I mentioned it only last week, that project that we've seen funded to assist young people get their hours up on the Northwest Coast so that they can get their licence and then really enter the workforce, because that is, in my area of the state, the barrier to entry for most people.
Is transport.
Absolutely, transport stops people from being to engage in the way that they would like to. And if you're coming from a place where you haven't had someone in your family, for whatever reason, able to help you get those hours up, you're simply not going to be able to get your licence. So that sort of funding, bringing Jobs Tasmania together, bringing YFCC together, bringing the driver mentors together, I think that will prove to be a way of encouraging government, the not-for-profit industry, and the community services industry, and our people in place to come together to find those solutions.
And Alex, that area of systems change is absolutely crucial, isn't it? Because particularly for you on the north,
or shifting big rocks, as I understand, in plain English, is how it might be described. Yeah.
And Alex, from the northwest coast and myself from the north, I think sometimes our not-for-profits can work in isolation.
Yeah.
And I've even heard them being very proud of the fact that, we don't get any government funding, we don't work with the system, etc. We do our own thing. And I know now that there are projects that we've funded where one of the milestones has been you must develop relationships with those who have the ability to change policy. You can't work in isolation.
No.
And it's only if we all work together. And I've been amazed over the journey at those not-for-profits who haven't had the networks into government and into...
reasonably sizable ones too.
Exactly. And one of the things hopefully that we've been able to do over the period of time is open doors to allow them to be able to talk to those who can change policy, can change the direction of where funding goes to, and that can lead to that systems change that we're talking about. And I'm with you, if we seed fund some of those things, like that driver education, then other places around the state might well be suitable. And we'll always make sure we're not imposing, it's got to be place-based, but others may learn from and say, actually, that's a really good model in order to address the key issue, which we know is transportation in order to get into employment. So systems change being just such an important part.
Yeah, and that sense of whether it be independence or an idealising not having connection because you are independent. I just don't see that as being the most constructive way for an organisation or a community to think of itself. Whether you say I'm in the system or not, the practical reality is that we are. And we want communities that thrive. We want communities that have a sense of self. We understand and really celebrate their individual characters. But if you don't have a seat at the table, then your voice isn't going to be heard. And so how do you help those organisations and those communities get that seat at the table? I think has been part of the legacy of the past few years, and certainly our time on the board together.
And I think in saying that, we have to acknowledge our General Manager in Lola, who,
without question,
who has ensured that people do get a seat at the table and has invited and has opened up the opportunities just by that networking that she's done over the period of time, which and it's also really in the last couple of years meant we've started to get some really good philanthropic money into the state, and I only see that growing over the next period of time, and I'm really excited about the fact of the ability to partner with other philanthropic organisations in order to get some real outcomes within the state.
I don't think that you can say that there's much to know about the Tasmanian community that Lola doesn't know. She has absolutely driven that sense and that culture within our organisation that you have to understand the context from which people come. And we've done a lot of work as a board under your leadership. I think about some of those most special moments for me on being on this board. Absolutely, it's funding successful programs and it's meeting people that have influence and speaking to them about the challenges that Tasmanian communities face. But my favourite memories that I'll talk about will be those ones of travelling to where people are, in places like this, off the main roads. We had a very special day up at Muscle Row last year, 2023, Sally, with Auntie Patsy. She was so generous with her time to stand there looking over those islands and hearing her talk about her family and its connection to La Truita and the island that we call home and most people call Tasmania. You know, extraordinary resilience and extraordinary leadership, and an extraordinary approach to collaboration and working together in the spite of all sorts of reasons not to.
And we leave, don't we, with
We do.
an organisation like that, you know, having just been successful, again, some seed funding that we provided to assist them to start a ranger program. And it was only in the last couple of weeks that the federal government announced the fact that they will fund for 11 rangers up there. And, you know, that's a really good example of just that seed funding and what it's been able to do and what it will do for the future of that organisation and for that community up there, which is, for me, you know, one of the things that I feel very special about as I depart. So, yeah.
And as we depart, how do you think the TCF will change moving forward?
Look, I look back over the last 9 years and it's changed considerably. When I first started, the number of projects that we were funding, the types of things we were funding, as I said, a lot of projects, smaller projects, a lot of infrastructure projects, and at the time very suitable what the community wanted. And the TCF board members actually out reviewing and seeing how those projects were going. Over the period, I know Lola right from the start was very clear that we were too broad and that we needed to start to focus, and I think we've done that particularly well over the period. There hasn't been a revolution, it's been an evolution, and we've just kept moving towards getting that focus where we can actually get real impact with our amount of money that we have. And I think moving forward we will continue to need to focus. So, you know, as I said, I think we've got 100 active projects at the moment. You know, I wouldn't be surprised to see in the next few years that decrease, because I think we will have larger projects, longer amounts of time in regard to those projects, more players as far as partners in those projects, you know, for example, the National Philanthropics. And I think for a period of time, the area of education and those barriers will still be there, barriers to learning, because it's such a big issue for Tasmania. But then I'd also like to see the TCF move into some areas where we're seeing the National Philanthropics, and that's in the area of social enterprise. We've funded a couple of things in social enterprise. You know, I immediately think of seed funding the Hamlets of this world and the Dress for Successes, etc. But I'd love to see more Tasmanians thinking about social enterprise as a option moving forward, and the ability to fund some areas where there's some real innovation, for me would be something that I would look towards.
It's certainly an exciting model, and I think that it captures that desire for systems change, whilst also answering that question that funders always have, which is, what does this look like when this funding goes? We're talking about that in various ways all the time at our board meetings. What's the capacity for this organisation to see this funded in some other way? Now, obviously, if that's self-driven, that's even better.
And Alex, I think we've seen some change over the period, haven't we? Where, you know, in the early days, organisations only start to think about that sustainability issue at the end of the process. What we're doing now is getting it into the milestones around the deeds, where they're starting to think about it right from the start. And even as we're giving funding, we're actually asking the question, okay, so to what degree have you already started to think about how you're going to make this sustainable? So, and yeah, I think that's a really important part moving forward for the organisation.
And in helping organisations move forward, we ask them to do work internally occasionally. So when we talk about capacity and capability building, what are you talking about?
Look, for me, I think I made the comment about the strategic planning thinking, for some of those. I look at our Emerging Community Leader program that we've run over the last 8 years. And, I see from that, I think we've had 150 participants in that program over the period. And I see people who came into the room with a heap of potential, who are working in the not-for-profit, who were probably pretty exhausted because they work so hard. But day-to-day decision-making, etc. I think programs like Emerging Community Leaders show us the potential that there is there to build capability and capacity. I now, drive down the highway and I hear some of those people who have done our program or have done any of the pathways to learning, and they've just increased in their ability, whether it be as simple as public speaking, the fact that they can get on radio and talk through things that they're passionate about, but even more so that they are thinking that longer term, they're thinking solutions, they're thinking systems, they're thinking place-based. So those are the types of things. I believe we've got terrific champions in regional areas, but it's also not only how do we ensure that they continue and they don't burn out, but how do we bring along the next generation of champions? And I think, and you might have some comments about this from the North West Coast perspective, we can't expect the next generations of champions to be exactly the same as what these were. So, whilst we might have had, the presidents of the clubs, etc., I think our young people will be looking for something different when they volunteer and looking for something different in the structures of some of those organisations. Would you like to make comment about champions and regions?
I agree with the reflection that we're used to seeing particular individuals do a lot of lifting, particularly when you get to the smaller places. We were on King Island recently and we met a few people over there that as soon as you start talking to them about the one organisation or association they're involved in, inevitably they've got to reel off the other half a dozen that they're also involved in. And I love those people in communities, but I also worry for them. It's such a lot of effort. But they are the key drivers a lot of the time, and they do know a lot of people, and they know who's got the capacity to volunteer in different spaces. But I'm also really keen to see how we engage that next group because they are there, and we know that there are topics and challenges that really energise our young people, and that they want to have communities that feel vibrant in the places that they live. And we as those of us already lucky enough to be in the workforce and with more settled lives, will want to see how they can contribute in a way that's meaningful to them. I will be interested to see if that happens on a more fluid basis. I could see it happening where there are, if I call them backbone organisations or providers of that governance support in places to help organisations continue to tick along, but then you see champions of particular issues step into the fold and run with something hard for a period of time and then relinquish for someone else who might have a particular passion in a particular area.
And we've seen that, Alex, haven't we, with things like collective impact the equivalent, and we know that does work. And we know that from that, as you say, we pick up people who come in for a period of time in order to make a big difference and then are comfortable to depart for a while and come back in, and it becomes a bit more on a project-by-project basis as opposed to on that same committee as the secretary or the treasurer or the president.
That's right.
Yeah.
with an understanding, though, that then means that the people that are involved in that, and I use Backbone and those people that are within the industry and that have done significant community development work will recognise that language as being from that collective impact model. I'm not wedded to that as the only model of success, but effectively I think that idea of a system that provides support so that people can focus on the challenge itself rather than having all of their time taken up with the effort that goes into keeping the good governance of an organisation running. I think we're nearing the end of our chat this afternoon, Sally. It feels important for me to ask you, as the chair of the TCF for the period of time that I've been on the board, when we talk about leadership, what do you think's needed for Tasmania?
Yeah, look, I think there are a lot of things that we're doing well in the state. But as I say that, and I look at some sectors going really, really well, it does concern me that we don't leave people behind and that people have access and people have a voice. And so for me, the last 9 years, the opportunity to work in the community sector and the not-for-profit sector, I've actually loved that. And I would encourage people moving forward to get involved in the sector, because that does ensure that we have a Tasmania where everybody is developing and growing, and it's not just being left with some doing that. And I'm really aware that over the 9 years that I've been involved, I think the gap between the haves and the have-nots has got larger, and with cost of living, etc., pressures, our ability to, in a small place like Tasmania, ensure that everybody is thriving, to me is really important. And I hope that our leaders moving forward continue to think about those people and continue to have the policies and support to allow people to realise their potential. And that, to me, is what leadership's all about.
I couldn't agree more. I think that those of us who are lucky enough to know where our bed is, know where our meals are coming from, know that we have the skills and knowledge to manoeuvre our way through the world, have a real obligation to ensure that as best we can we're allowing other people that same chance. And at the moment we have systems that don't do that. And once you recognise that, you can have a big impact. For the TCF, Sally, there's an overarching guiding focus of making decisions independently. That's not without challenge sometimes. Can you just reflect for a moment or two on why that independence is so important?
Absolutely. I think the independence allows you to be able to do that long-term thinking that we've been talking about. You know, for whatever reason, you're not motivated by anything that needs to be short-term. So for me, the independence is about allowing long-term thinking. It's about being able to take a few more risks sometimes. That we've been in positions where we've been able to seed funding that maybe governments and others might not have felt so comfortable to do up front. So I think our appetite for risk can be a little bit more. I think the opportunity to be innovative can be. So there's some of the things that come to mind for me with independence gives you that opportunity. Maybe you'd like to make comment for you. What does it mean for you, Alex?
It really means to me that at all times we're focused on the impact that the board is chasing in the Tasmanian community. It is the fundamental driver to every decision. To know that the people around the table come with that hat on, and if they don't, then that's very much declared and managed stringently to ensure that at all times it's the focus of the Tasmanian Community Fund on the Tasmanian community. And that is the key focus.
Alex, I think we might be getting the wind up, so I think we might finish it there. Look, from my perspective, just as I conclude, been an absolute pleasure to work with you over the past 6 years. Thoroughly enjoyed the opportunity. Feel as though, yes, we've achieved outcomes, but also we've had a really good time in doing it as well. So just on behalf of the TCF, I want to thank you for your contribution, and I'm sure from a statewide perspective, whilst you've brought a huge passion for the Northwest Coast, which has been so valuable to our organisation. Your ability to look at what's best for the whole state has been something that you've done with kindness and compassion, and I really appreciate that.
Well, let me have the first right of reply as we finish up. 9 years, Sally. It's been an extraordinary effort. We have had a fabulous time, led so capably by you. The board leaves an organisation that is on absolutely a strong and clear path to achieve excellent outcomes in Tasmania, and that comes down to your legacy. You've brought people from across the coast with various interests and various approaches to their work and really created an extraordinary culture around the table to enable really quality conversations to occur with, as I say, its focus being the Tasmanian community at all times. So I'm sure it's not the last time we'll work together, but it's been an absolute privilege.
Thanks, Alex.
You've been listening to the Breaking Barriers Building Futures podcast, presented by the Tasmanian Community Fund. The fund seeks to increase community well-being by removing barriers to learning and help Tasmanians to develop, deliver and lead responses to their needs. For more information, go to tascomfund.org.